want you to take a minute and check in with the people around you. And the answer of like, I literally don't know is a great answer, but what do you think UDL is? Like in your experience, when people talk about universal design for learning, what is it? What does it look like? And again, it's totally cool to be like, I'm just not really sure, that's why I'm here. So take a minute to just check in with each other. I'll walk around, stop me if you have any questions, and then we're gonna get cooking. So go right ahead, start chatting. What is UDL? I hand out cards and a free seat like Good morning. I keep saying, I always say good morning. It could be 10 o'clock at night. Good morning. Who's in TV? Hello. Hey, how are you? Good, how are you? Good, how's your year going? This is going to be old news for you. You know all this. Take a break, check your Twitter. Yeah. I know. Hi, how are you? How are y'all doing over here? So we are going to talk about UDL, what UDL is. You have a copy of this presentation in the folder if you would like to have a copy of it. But let's just dive right in. And we're going to, what we call in UDL, I call it the dinner party dilemma, right? And it's because when you are planning for students, okay, so like I'm a teacher, I have an inclusive classroom, planning for my students is very similar to planning for a dinner party, right? In that if I said to you, you're going to throw a party for me, I'm going to have 30 of my friends come over, and I need you to design something that works for all of them, okay? What are you going to make? And when I say that to you, if I say, hey, like, you're going to host a party for me, you're going to do all the planning, I'm not going to do it, but I'm going to bring 30 of my best friends, what is literally the first thing you want to ask me? You want to know about my guests. That is not universal design for learning. Okay? Universal design for learning is not designing for the kids in front of you. It's designing for all students. Okay? So when you're thinking about design, it's not like what do I do for the 30 kids in front of me? It's how do I design something so any child could be successful in my room. You know, you get a new student the next day, the lesson still works. Okay? And so we're going to talk about how to do this. But essentially what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to move away from one-size-fits-all thinking, but we also want to move away from designing tier 1 instruction through the lens of differentiated instruction. So we're going to talk about what is UDL, how is it different from differentiated instruction, and how do they work together in a multi-tiered system of support. So first, if I were to say, you have 2 hours to put together a meal that 30 people will definitely be able to eat, but you don't know anything about my friends, what are you going to make? So check in with each other for literally 30 seconds. I'm going to admire you talking to each other, and in 30 seconds you're going to tell me what could you make if you have to make 30 people eat. Ready, go. Ryan, what do you think?
Hi, how are you? There's 2 tickets to the Y, that's Y and Z. And they cook everyone. And then they had some like creative allergy things within that Rigor, but they said that everyone can eat.
Okay, coming back together.
The other is by eating that way.
So does anyone want to tell me, what could you create that you feel like would have a pretty good chance of feeding all of my guests without knowing anything about them? Okay, pasta bar, salad bar. I heard someone ever say like a make your own chili bar. Okay, we had, we'll make a couple of different dishes. You can potluck. Okay, the key is that you need to have options so that your guests can make choices. Okay, so that's like at its core. Now, what we tend to do is we don't think like that when we're designing a lesson. Okay, we think very much in casserole terms. So I always basically say that like, if you're not universally designing, you're like, I'm gonna do this one thing and expect everybody to get it. And that would be like saying that I am going to serve a casserole and 30 people are gonna eat it, right? I'm gonna have all kids in my class read the same book in hard copy. All the students are gonna do the same math problems in the same way with the same manipulatives. We're all gonna complete the same exact science lab. It's all due at the same time. It's supposed to be the same length, okay? And if it's handed in late, we're gonna start docking things. So it's like this one-size-fits-all thinking. And when we start with the one-size-fits-all thinking, we realize that like not everybody can eat. So again, I did this in the session this morning real quick. If I were to say I made lunch for all of you, and then I were to put a plate in front of each of you, okay, a plated tuna noodle casserole, okay, how many of you would actually eat the whole thing? Raise your hand, put it up loud and proud, right? So what we call you in UDL is mythical average learners, okay? Because when you teach in a one-size-fits-all way, you will have kids who can learn that way, okay? So they provide like a pretty dangerous narrative that like, well, see, they can do it, everybody should be able to do it. But for those of you who say, I'm not gonna eat the tuna noodle casserole, there's 2 reasons why. Okay, can someone tell me one reason? Yes.
I don't like tuna noodle casserole.
Okay, that's an engagement problem. You just don't want it. You have kids who are very capable of learning who just don't want to do the work. They don't like it. It's not relevant, it's not authentic, it's not meaningful. Why would I put in the effort and the time? It's not important to me. Okay, so you have engagement barriers by doing one-size-fits-all things, but then some of you actually, you know, you might say, well, I do kind of like it. Why aren't you going to eat it? Okay, you have an accessibility barrier. If you're on a diet, if you're vegan, if you're lactose intolerant, if you're gluten-free, it's just simply not accessible to you. And so when we value inclusion, when we create a tier 1 classroom where all students are present, okay, we can't serve casseroles. And so what ends up happening is when we do serve casseroles, we then have to differentiate instruction. And differentiated instruction in the research requires being responsive to student needs and student ability, and in a lot of ways leveling. So what you'll do is you'll say, like, those kids are struggling, so I'm gonna make them this, okay? And these kids are really gifted, so I'm gonna give them this. And you start creating individual meals. Now that's problematic as well, and again, I'm talking about it as a tier 1, because those kids walk in and they don't even get a chance to make a choice. Like, they don't even have an opportunity to try, okay? They just walk in and we say, I am very sorry, there's no way that you could eat the tuna noodle casserole because you're a vegetarian, so I have taken the liberty of making you this lovely tofu lentil stew. And you're like, that's gross too, and I'm like, I don't care, you're a vegetarian, right? So we start making meals for individual kids, thinking that we're getting it right without their voices, okay? So when tier 1 is a casserole, you're gonna be burying yourself trying to make individual meals for kids. And that is what is breaking our teachers' backs. Okay, they're short order cooks. Now on the flip side, if you start with buffet thinking, where all of you went there automatically, you would never throw a party and serve the same meal, ever. Okay? But we do it in classrooms all the time. And so when you start there, okay, now did you see how many people put up their hands? Okay, put up your hands for tuna noodle, raise your hand, look around, put up your hand if you could eat off a pasta buffet. Okay, so that same exact thing happens in classrooms. When we provide options and choices and allow students to self-differentiate their learning, okay, we can eliminate some of the barriers to accessibility and engagement. So this happens all the time in a lot of other ways. So the reason I'm talking about printed text is because we are obsessed with printed text in American education. Regardless of what you teach, you're handing out printed text. Okay, so it's primary source documents in history, it's science lab instructions, you know, it's math word problems, okay, and we're handing out all this text. And the reality is that a printed text, now I don't mean text in general, I literally mean a printed piece of paper. A printed text is as bad as a casserole because I can predict in an inclusive classroom that I'm going to have some guests who might face barriers to accessibility and engagement. Now, the difference between UDL and differentiated instruction is who's doing the differentiation. So if I say, as a 6th grade teacher, I would like all of my students to read the book thief, okay? And I'm gonna hand it out to everybody. If I don't allow for other options and choices, there's gonna be barriers. So tell me, what types of kids could you predict that would struggle with reading a hard copy of the novel The Book Thief? So just talk about it. Like, you don't have to know the kids. It's not like Brian, but it's like maybe some kids don't know English yet, right? It's that kind of thinking. Think about what are the barriers that the book creates, not the kids. Ready, go.
Some kids with trauma, there's there are parts of the book that are very hard to read.
Okay. So again, this is like the master of casseroling. Because what we say is everyone hands out the same book. So the kid gets the book in the hand. Now, what I can recognize right away is there are serious restrictions that will make this very difficult task for a lot of kiddos. Okay, so anyone want to say, like, what are some of the reasons why kids may struggle with this? Okay, they're not decoding at the 6th grade level yet. So then that's an access barrier.
English learners,
They're English learners, that's an access barrier.
the ability to goal plan, do review.
Okay, you just comprehension strategies. You could be a pretty strong, decoder. The comprehension strategies. You might not know what the Holocaust is. I mean, it's the whole premise of the book is the kid is literally willing to die to get a book in her hands. She is like, Germany has burned all these books, and she like wants a book to have, and she's like going into things where she's going to get herself killed so she can get like a book, sneak a book, and like that is not the reality for many learners. And so it's like again the background. So we start going, this could be problematic. What's really interesting though is we always have to start with in UDL, firm goals, flexible means. What is actually my goal? The book thief cannot be a goal. Okay, the goal is all of the kids have to be able to understand how characters change as the plot moves forward. Okay, and when I recognize that that's the goal, every time I can identify a barrier, I can eliminate it to give it a buffet equivalent. So again, some kids cannot decode that text at that level. What can I provide as another option? Audio. I've eliminated the decoding barrier. Okay? Now here's the issue, is we often only allow this for kids who we think are not capable. And that's differentiated instruction. You are not great readers, so you are allowed to have the audio. Okay? As opposed to, all right everyone, I really want to do a close reading of chapter 2 because it's a really rich chapter about the characterization. So you can listen to it or you can read it. And let's talk about the benefits. Who could audio benefits? Like I can think of one person, which would be, like let's say we assign homework and we have kiddos who are doing sports and they're spending a lot of time on the bus. And they're nauseated by reading a book. Okay, that's a great use of audio to get reading done. When they otherwise couldn't get it done. So we often say in UDL, what is good for some is good for all. Now, the caveat here is every option actually has to allow kids to meet the standard. Because there is some really bad UDL, which is, let's say the goal is explain how the dinosaurs became extinct. And traditionally, you have all kids like write a report. And you go, well, some of my kids have some like pretty decent motor skills issues, so they can write it or they can type it. They can use Dragon Naturally Speaking. It doesn't have to be a report. It could be a presentation. It could be a commercial where they do a skit, la 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 la. And then you have a choice like you could make a dinosaur out of clay. That is a stupid choice, and I know that they say there's no stupid choices, but there are, because you can't show me by making a dinosaur, you can't explain how they became extinct. And so on a lot of menu boards, they're not measuring the same thing. So like a teacher gives a book, all the kids read the same book, and then it's like now you get to choose what you're going to share about the book. And it's like one of them is like draw your favorite character. Another one is like write an alternative ending. Another one is like talk about create a story in the same setting but a different story. And it's like those are literally 5 different standards, and therefore they cannot be offered at the same time. So when you're looking at options and choices, the options and choices are what will allow students to still meet that goal. And what I know is that I can get students to meet that goal by reading The Book Thief, by listening to The Book Thief, by reading or listening to another book that is more culturally and linguistically appropriate. I still want the level of rigor on the text, but again, that is very easy to teach kids how to find books within their lexile. And so as you think about this concept, I want you to think about where are your colleagues in the kitchen? Okay, because if we're focused on everyone must do the same thing in the same way, okay, we end up following something as it's designed, and when kids fall behind, we just say they don't belong here. Okay? Or really, really high quality education will say, well, let's react, let's continue to act, let's add accommodations, let's add modifications, let's just give them something different to keep them in the room. Okay, true inclusion proactively provides all students with the same options and choices, and it plans and values variability. Okay, you start by designing a buffet and saying, I see you, and I believe that you can make choices about your own learning, and all of these options, if you use them, would allow you to get to the same goal. Okay, and I'm never gonna lower the ceiling, I'm always gonna raise the floor. So take a minute and reflect on, where are your colleagues in the kitchen? Are they designing for all? Are they designing a casserole? Or are they designing a casserole and then burying themselves, trying to make individual meals for every single student to try to keep them afloat? Okay, so check in with each other for 30 seconds. I have no idea, I'll just keep talking. You can all ignore me, we're just testing your volume. That is just fine. There we go. Yeah. Okay. So apparently everyone in every session could hear me talking. The mic was a lot. So I want to show you a video. I love this video. I show it all the time. Which is, this is a video of a high school kid that went viral because he is tired of casseroles. And one of the casserole that's very pervasive in schools today that I would love to eradicate is the packet. Handing out a hard copy packet. Like that for me is it's fire starter. I just want to throw a big bonfire. But this kiddo is just, he is incensed that he has this packet. So I want you to listen to him, but it's not so much him. I want you to listen to the teacher. Okay, because he is trying to advocate that he needs to learn in a different way, and many kids will never advocate that. They'll communicate to us in other ways, but they won't be able to articulate what he's saying. But her reaction to him is very much I am in charge. It doesn't matter if it doesn't work for you. This is what I'm doing. Okay, so just listen to her, and then we're going to reflect on it.
Freaking lady, go off on kids, because they don't freaking get this crap. If you would just get up and teach them instead of handing them a freaking packet, yo. There's kids in here who don't learn like that. They need to learn face to face. Or you're just getting mad because I'm pointing out the obvious. And you're just
wasting my time.
No, I'm not wasting your time. I'm telling you what you need to do.
Get out.
You want kids to come into your class, you want them to get excited for this, you gotta come in here, you gotta make them excited. You want a kid to change and start doing better, you gotta touch his freaking heart. Can't expect the kid to change if all you do is just tell him. You gotta take this job serious. This is the future of this nation. And when you come in here, like you did last time, and make a statement about, oh, this is my paycheck, indeed it is. But this is my country's future and my education.
Can you go outside, please?
But there's a limit when I'm not bitching, but simply making an observation.
Okay.
And now I will leave. You're welcome. And if you would like, I'll teach you a little more so you can actually learn how to teach a freaking class. Because since I got here, I've done nothing but read packets. So don't try and take credibility for teaching me jack.
Just go, bye.
Okay. So take a moment and just like reflect on the teacher mindset and what the student is trying to articulate. Because again, that's the voice of students who don't articulate that but experience that on a daily basis. It's not teaching if you're just dropping down something in front of kids and being like, well, you don't get it, I guess you don't belong in this room anymore. Okay, inclusive practice means taking a high quality curriculum and being able to identify what the barriers are to access and engagement and supplementing that with different options and choices that are available to all students so everybody can meet the goal. And that is very different from the way that we often design things because in some ways it almost feels like I earned the right to design what I want to design. But we always have to remember that like I work for kids, okay? And I don't have a right to design something that doesn't work for all kids. So take a moment and just reflect on that video. What does it remind you of? What questions does it bring up? And then we'll come back together in 2 minutes.
They just kind of like, it's just accident. Yeah.
Watching it again, and we were saying, is he the only one? Like, if I remember correctly, like, yeah, is he the only kid who could have gotten away with it? So I have a point there. Yeah. Like, how many kids of color, and what was that? That could be the walking of the festival. Right. Right, that's what he's saying. Like, you're disrespecting me. Yeah. Let's just go back to that. I know what you want me to do. Right, yeah, you aren't hearing. Somebody's not trying to understand how this is. Right, you can't hear you. Right.
And her analogies,
I kind of, I'm pretty good. Just because I'm not very big. I'm not good. Right, so I think it's different with one of like I couldn't do the Dora vocabulary. I feel kind of
actually 20 pounds of more than 5 pounds back. What does that mean?
that's like it actually stops us.
So,
I often do things where
that's right.
yeah, point 6.
Like your full name.
Our schedule is those teachers
How are you doing over here?
they're not so our system for kids like they are you don't do a great job of I really like to so the kick comes in and usually working on they haven't
Like, for example, they have
exactly.
He agreed the kid just did the joke for that. It embarrassed her. Yeah.
And our kids, yeah, I know.
Sometimes teachers need to kind of laugh at them.
Right now, which is an issue.
It can lead to remembering our mistakes. They leave me thinking I am like so a lot of people and that's good. Yeah, but yeah, so that's the system we're teaching. And like the really important thing is some teachers want it because you're always learning there. Anyway, I'm kind of oh wow. Oh wow, okay. Yeah. It's you're not hiding the bathroom.
That's what you just say, hey, it embarrassed me. So apologize. Just pull the kid aside and say, hey, we did get this. Go get a whole bunch. Just keep looking at the teacher.
They have especially we said our teachers we're back table too. Right now I'm a data game.
Always had a good looking teacher.
Yeah, so it's how do we yeah. Thing is, so there's all the minutes and all the ways people are doing it. Like, okay. And it just felt a little more, I mean, after and that's why I was there. Right, anyone who chooses that, yeah. Like, it's good to have a sitting some sort of I said, because you're like, I have to be taking a test. We are also timing.
But you won't learn anything when you're in the class.
So here it is, the format-based test. Yeah, that's what I want to know.
I don't know. I mean, it's different things in different math classes or the same.
That's your job.
So let's just talk about two different visuals. I, capital H, hate this baseball image. And I know it's everywhere, but I'm going to tell you why I hate it and it will make sense. So in theory, we talk about like the traditional system versus what equality is, what is equity is. So like in a traditional system, everybody, you know, really gets the same thing. It's very casserole-like, it's very one size fits all, you know, you all get the book, bada bing, bada boom. You know, when you're thinking about like, you know, how to create a system that is more like, you know, equal, we try to equal the playing field by providing some kids with more support. And it's really focused on like, I feel like you need this, so I'm gonna give it to you, and I feel like you need this. And, you know, technically everybody could see, but the big barrier is that there's still like this blocking in front of it. And the reason that I hate the last picture as a picture of equity is because the kids still aren't participating in the game. Like they're stealing the game from behind a chain link fence. And like the whole song is like, take me out to the ball game, take me out with the crowd. They're not with the crowd, they're flipping still in the game. And like, I don't want to create a system where kids can passively watch what other people are doing. And that was my issue with the visual, and I know it was not meant to be like that, but that's how I see it. It's like, I don't want that for my own children, to be like literally watching the game from 200 meters away. I want them to have a seat where everyone else has a seat. Because like, it ain't no game if you're not in Fenway. And so what I tried to create is saying like, yes, equality is that like everybody gets kind of the same thing. And a lot of the times we talk about, you know, equity is some kids get more. But a lot of the times we have kids in classrooms where we give some kids additional support and we say that it's because of equity, but they're never involved in their own learning. They don't know how to become learners. You know, they're not making choices for themselves. They're not feeling empowered by the content. And so in UDL, we call that expert learning. Is yes, some kids need more support, absolutely. All students, however, deserve options and choices that allow them to be a part of the class. And one of my girlfriends, Andrew Tisha Fitzgerald, she talks about a spectrum that goes from power to honor. When you maintain your power in a classroom, you are dishonoring students. Okay, because I have to give up my power to honor kids, which means I don't get to decide. There's only one way to do this. And so when you're thinking about expert learning, you know, I don't want kids to learn by watching other people doing things. I want them involved in really meaningful learning. And so when you think about like the difference between that, there are really, really subtle differences between universal design for learning and differentiated instruction. In a multi-tiered system, they both have their place, but when you are designing tier 1, I want you thinking about how to design a classroom that works for everyone, not the kids you have. You will never end up with an inclusive classroom by focusing on the kids that are in front of you, because the goal is to make it so any kid could be in front of you. Okay? We want to move away from like the leveling and the small grouping and like the giant clusters of kids. Because if we can create a classroom that's truly inclusive, any kid could be placed there. And right now, it's like, let's take the kids who are struggling and we'll give them to her because she's good with those kids. Nope, not allowed. Everyone has to be prepared and have the competency to meet the needs of all kids. And that means that you have to design a lesson that any student can flourish in. Okay? Because otherwise, I start looking at the kids in front of me and I'm like, oh, this is what they need. But what if I'm teaching like an honors class that has 100 hoops to jump through? Like, I could never universally design it because UDL was designed to eliminate inequity so all kids could receive access to grade level rigor. And so that's why we're thinking about what are the differences. So the problem is both frameworks use the word differentiate. So differentiated instruction is essentially when you're looking to see groups of students that need a particular intervention or level of support and you give them to them. Carol Tomlinson has always advocated for flexible groupings, meaning using data to say, you 3 are struggling with this, so I'm going to give you this for that. okay? But I need data that says now that that's intervened. What has happened with DI is those are my smart kids, those are my low kids, those are my behavior kids. Okay, that is never what Carol Tomlinson had envisioned. It was all, how are we responsive to students' needs? So in MTSS, Tier 2 is differentiated instruction. Okay, but I want to supplement really great Tier 1. Okay, now I might still universally design Tier 2, but the bump to Tier 2 is often required by the system. It is not student differentiated. Like a student's not going to be like, I really think I need Wilson right now. Okay? The system says, based on your data, you need a really intensive reading program, and we want to make sure that you get that. Okay? But you're going to get it in addition to being in a classroom that is like really pushing you to understand and appreciate like the beauty of being a literate person who can not only read literature, but read maps and charts and body language and like the magic of expression. You know, we don't write to impress a teacher, we write to express ourselves, and there's a huge distinction there. And so what I want you to watch for here is UDL is self-differentiation. I design the class and then honor my students to make their own decisions. I then am consistently going to be looking at data, and I don't mean a standardized test, I mean observational data, checking in with kids, and when I need to respond, I will respond, okay, with differentiated instruction as a layer, but I'm going to always give kids the opportunity to design their own education. And so in this party, he starts off by being very universally designed. He's going to have all these different kind of cups, he's going to have all this different type of food, and he slips in the video. He slides into differentiated instruction world, but he does it without giving people a chance. Okay, and that's what is like so key about this, is creating an inclusive classroom where all students have equal opportunities to make choices about their learning. So what I want you to listen for is, when does he transition to labeling his guests and taking away their power to choose? All right, and then what I want you to talk about is how would his guests feel being labeled that way and having a different experience? And how could he have universally designed his education, his invitation, I'm sorry. So this is Jerry Brooks, he's a principal in Lexington, Kentucky. And again, he's throwing a differentiation party. And so your decision is like, where is he universally designing? Which just means, I'm gonna put this stuff out there. And then where does he differentiate instruction? There's one part where he basically lumps his guests and then he takes away their power to choose.
I've just come from my favorite store, the Dollar Tree. I'd have some suggestions for a party if you would like to have some educators over to your house this summer. They got some great ideas. They got these pineapple cups, these coconut cups. You could have a Hawaiian theme party, but I have an even better suggestion that's going to blow your mind. You can get these great cups at the Dollar Tree, and I know what you're thinking, that's just a red Solo cup. Let me show you something. Boom. They have a different size. Wait, one more time. Boom. Differentiation party. You can meet the needs of all your party goers. Some people just need a regular size drink. Some people don't need that much to drink. Some people need a big old drink. You can meet the needs of all your party goers with these great red Solo cup from the Dollar Tree. Think about all the possibilities at your differentiation party. You can differentiate the food. You could have some wings, some barbecue wings, a little bit spicy. For those that don't like spicy, you could have some honey barbecue wings. For those that need some extra spice, you could have some of them 5-alarm Tabasco wings. You could differentiate the heat in your wings. You could have some meatballs, and you can meet the needs of those that don't eat red meat by having turkey balls. You can meet your party goers' needs by having some tofu balls for those that are vegetarians. You can even differentiate your dip. You can make one of them 7-layer dips with the refried beans and the salsa and the onions and cheeses. You could differentiate, make a 6-layer dip, maybe leave out the onions. Then you could make an 8-layer dip, maybe add some extra festive cheese. You can even differentiate the time of your party. You could have your party from 7 to 9, invite all the fun people from 7 to 9, but you could actually invite the wild, crazy people from 6 to 9 because they could handle some extra time. Then you could just invite the fun people, a little bit boring, that can't handle a big old long party. You could do them from 8 to 9. You could even differentiate the time of your party. I'm telling you, there's a lot of things you can do with your differentiation party. Starting out with these great cups from the Dollar Trees. Go out and get you some. You're going to be the talk of all the teachers at your differentiation party.
Okay, so what you're going to do here, and it's so subtle, and this is why I think that it's so tricky to differentiate between the two frameworks, no pun intended. There is one spot in that video, and like really try to hash it out with each other, where he makes all the decisions, okay? And I want you to answer those 3 questions once you agree on when that moment in time was. Ready, go. Okay. So it's tricky. And again, like, we're just going to take a guess, and that's why this work is so tricky, because everyone's like, oh, UDL, we used to call that DI. I'm like, no, they're very different. But they're also very similar. You know, so you end up with this like this web of Venn diagram that's like, what is this framework? Okay, but does anyone feel pretty confident they know where he slipped into DI world? Yeah, the party goers and the time that they were going to go. And I'll talk about why the difference is so subtle. He basically said some people might not eat meat, so I'm going to make this. But there was never you can't have tofu unless so he was kind of thinking about, like, if I'm an English teacher, I'm going to say, okay, we're going to write an essay, and the standard says write, so everyone's going to write. Okay, that's what the standard says, and UDL is very firm goals, flexible means. But I know that some people might have a really hard time organizing it, so I'm going to make sure there's a graphic organizer and exemplar available. Some students might have difficulty with transitions. I'm going to give some sentence stems. Some kiddos might, might have a really hard time writing about this one thing, so I'm going to let them choose what they want to write about, right? And I start thinking about all these things I want on the buffet. But like, I'm still going to allow my guests to decide, is that going to allow you to meet the goal or not? Okay, and a lot of the times, we give like an exemplar to the kids who are struggling. So I write professionally, I write in academic journals, and if somebody contacts me and says, hey, we would love for you to write an article in Principal Leadership, it's about 700 words, could you write one? What is one of the first things that would make sense for me to do? Like, read what they publish. I need to see an exemplar. And like, so often it's like, I'm not going to give an exemplar, they're going to copy it. Okay, the only reason they're going to copy it is they just don't have the macro structure yet to write their own way, and if they do that enough, it becomes internal. And it's this whole, but that's not fair. Okay, but it's not fair to exclude certain students. And so what he does is he's very inclusive, because he's thinking about, I'm going to put all these different cups out, I'm going to put all this different food out, and then he excludes, and he says, like, you are only going to come from 8 to 9, because you're not fun. Okay? You are only going to come from 7 to 9 because you're only kind of fun, and you are all very fun, and you can come from 6 to 9, right? And we do this in classrooms. You don't have to do all the same problems. You can read the graphic novel while all of your classmates around you have a very clearly more rigorous text, and that's pretty embarrassing. I'm going to pull you out in front of everybody. Those are exclusionary practices. And UDL is all about inclusionary practices, and we're going to talk about that a little bit tomorrow in the keynote. So, can kids feel that? When you walk in at 8 o'clock, can you feel that? Yeah. You know nobody thinks that you're capable of anything else. You don't even have a chance to try. You don't even have an opportunity to prove anybody wrong, because we have decided you don't deserve that opportunity. and every kid deserves the same opportunities as their peers, even if they fail 100 times in a row. Okay, the 101st time, I'm still gonna give you the chance. Because eventually you're gonna get it. And so when you think about that, okay, the reality is there is variability in people's ability to self-regulate in a party. Okay, but he can acknowledge that and universally design that invitation so the tier 1 is inclusive. Okay, and did anyone talk about how you could do that? Yes?
You just say, take 6 to 7, this is going on at 7, this is going on at 8 to 9, and then say, come on, you want to, based on what's going on.
Right. How much safer is that? Guys, I'm having a party from 6 to 9. I would love, everyone needs to come for an hour. Okay, that's the minimum, that's the expectation, everyone comes for an hour. You know, if you're more into eating, you know, 6, the food will be fresh. You know, if you're more into watching drunk people, 8 to 9 is the way to go. But like literally, if you think about a party, there's very different beginning and ending of parties. Now, I'm going to universally design it, and then I'm going to take time to allow my students to self-reflect. And I'm going to say, okay, so like look at the invitation, think about your own transportation needs. Now, we're not going to judge each other. You're not going to be like, oh, you only came for an hour, that's so lame. We got stuff to do. Some of us have to work, some of us have basketball practice, some of us can't get picked up. So an hour doesn't mean we can't stay for 3 hours. It's just not the best choice tonight. Okay? So like think about what you want to do. You know, if you want to stretch yourself, think about what you need. Like, you know, do you need to bring a phone and excuse yourself to the bathroom real quick if you're feeling a little, right? Have these conversations and then allow kids to actually make a choice. Okay? Now, I have decided that this table here I was very worried about. I would have 8 to 9'd you. Okay? I'm feeling as though they are a little dysregulated here, right? And so they come at 6 and like, you know, the like, oh boy, okay, I don't see this going well. And people ask that, but what if a kid picks something that you know is not good for them? You don't know what is good and what is not good for kids. You do not know. You might have a decent educated guess, but you cannot say, what if the kid picks this? That is too much power. Okay, if the kid picks that, you let him try. Because that's too hard for him. Okay, let him try. Like, that's awesome. Like, you know, I couldn't play with the Celtics very well, but I'd be a better ball player if I practice with them every day, even if I don't make the Celtics, right? What if they choose the thing that's too easy? Why is it too easy? Because you would say a very strong reader is taking an easy way out to choose an audiobook. But the kid gets car sick and knows he's on a bus for 2 hours. It's a really smart choice. It's not an easy choice. It's actually a really brilliant choice because he just wants to get it done. And so as you think about this, okay, what's going to happen is they're having an awesome time. It's 7, it's 7:30, it's 8, I'm wrong. Okay, I let them make their own choices, I empower them, I'm wrong. At 8:15, Roseanne starts punching people. Okay, do I intervene? Do I respond? Absolutely I do. So I think people have this fear of UDL, of like, I'm not going to let a kid sit in my classroom and do nothing for an hour and a half. But I'm going to say, I believe you can make a choice. And I'm going to check in and be like, okay, tell me about your choice. What are you stuck on? I don't know where to start. Okay, cool. Like up there might be some choices. Do you want to talk to someone else first? Do you want me to help you first? I'm going to still provide options. Okay, we can't puppeteer student success because that only works with kids who have the ability to self-regulate, who are compliant, and who are at or about grade level. They're the mythical average. Okay, and that's who we serve right now, at the expense of everybody else. So just take a moment and think about this analogy, because again, I think too often we rush to differentiated instruction without actually designing something that kids have a fair chance of accessing. Okay, so I'm going to show you some examples of this after I give you 2 minutes to just talk to each other, decompress, ask me questions, and then we'll go.
Testing, 1, 2. Test, 1, 2. Check, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2.
So in the class where it goes to Shakespeare.
You should look at our teachers. Any kids
Academic aid motivation factor, right? That's your students' lack of motivation, particularly if the priorities are not wanting to study. That's how they prove like the actual diligence. Direct assessment, academic factors rather than
very good. And like, if I have to students like in the choice because I would like to tell them, they just go, but I'm here about it. And also like, and like,
right. So there's like a negative like, right? Oh, here's the evidence quality. All right. Quality. Just put in some.
so look at it.
Nice guys. Evidence is like the most basic.
Right. Our numbers are going way down. And then if you Google Groupings, you have the instructional foundations, they're providing all the everything that you would see on a teacher's study. We adopted that. Yeah, I still come to your classes all the time. I'm like, hey, come on, you let's not that start. I'm like, and like all the teachers are like, and I'll just like take it over. All right. I am now on strike 2 of talking too loud. Strike 2. Yep, this is strike 2. I'm going to try to reel it in. But I get excited and then my voice gets loud. And apparently I'm interrupting all the other sections. So, okay. So one of the most common tools when you're talking about UDL are these UDL guidelines, which can be a little dangerous because people start looking at them as a checklist of things that they do as teachers. I want you to instead think about it as 9 places where there could be barriers to learning. So like if your kids aren't learning, it might be because, top left-hand corner, they are not interested at all in what you are doing. They just don't care. Like you're saying, I don't like tuna noodle casserole, I don't want to eat it. Kids will do the same things. That is a stupid book. I am not going to read it, right? And so if the barrier is your kids are not interested, the strategies underneath are called the checkpoints. Not necessarily to say that every day you have to do all of them, but these are strategies that are evidence-based. And there are 800 peer-reviewed articles that support all of these checkpoints. The ways to get kids interested are, you can, you can like look at this online, but it talks about like first, provide them with choices. It's a lot easier to get someone interested when they have a choice. The other thing is make sure that what you're doing is actually relevant and authentic and meaningful. So, I taught English for 12 years, and I would have kiddos who would say, like, reading is so stupid, and I would be like, but you're wrong, it's not. And they would be like, what do you mean? I'm like, listen, reading is a set of comprehension strategies that can be applied to anything. And so, like, I used to show them a little clip of two people on a date, and I would say, what did you see? And it looks like very, like, normal, like they're having dinner. I'm like, wrong. He's really uncomfortable and wants to get out, and she's way too into him. And they're like, what are you talking about? I said, do you know how to read body language? And they're like, no. And I'm like, well, reading's stupid, so why would you care? Like, you're gonna be on a date and someone's not gonna be into you and you won't even know it. And they're like, well, how do you read body language? And I'm like, for every literacy strategy I give you, I will give you one body language clue. And they're like, well then what, and so we started talking about that. Like, people lie, they look up to the left, right? All of those different things, fidgeting. And I said, there's clues like that in books too. It's actually pretty cool because everyone in this world is trying to manipulate you, every single one. I said, no matter what you read, there is no real, there is no nonfiction. Like, bias of the author is always a thing. So if you want to read rhetoric, you can try to figure out how people are brainwashing you as we speak. I'm brainwashing you now, you don't even know it, right? And they'd be like, what are these strategies? I'm like, oh, look who's interested in English now, right? But that's all about, are we taking the time to express that this transcends, if your reason of why you're teaching this is it's because on the test or you need it in 6th grade, like, just, I'll starve. I'm not interested in your casserole. And we see that with a lot of kids, right? So all these guidelines is if we really want kids to be learners, okay, we have to get it so they're motivated. We have to get it so they're resourceful, that they're doing some of the work, and we have to do it so they are goal-directed. Okay? I don't want to program students to write a paper because I can program robots to write a paper. Okay? Now, some big news happened last week. First time ever, they got a robot to pass 3-part high-stakes graduation tests, pre-programmed. So the test isn't requiring true critical thinking, it's all an algorithm. Right? A robot can pass a high-stakes graduation exam now. So what are we doing with kids? We have to teach them how to be purposeful and motivated and resourceful, and they also have to know the algorithms, right? They also have to have core knowledge. But this is just the places where you might have barriers. And so as you're working with teachers, it's like, why aren't your kids being really successful? It might be they just don't know the vocab well enough. They don't understand the language you're using. And so what do you do when the kids don't know the language? And then it gives you those tips. So those are what the UDL guidelines are for. But what happens a lot of the time is people will look at this and they'll go, oh, I do that. Right? So under language and symbols, it says clarify vocabulary. Okay? Any teacher in the universe is probably teaching vocabulary. Many, let me hand out 10 rando words a week and then make you take a quiz on that. That is not clarifying vocabulary. That is giving a casserole vocab test. So when you're talking about like language and vocabulary, it's so much more complex. These are not things that teachers do. It's strategies you have to consider that if you were to implement them, could you remove some barriers so your class was less restrictive? And the reality is a lot of people will say, I do this already. Okay? So I want you to take a second and I want you to think about the fact that UDL is not something that you're like, oh, I do that. Last week, I allowed kids to either make a brochure or a podcast. Okay? UDL cannot be a one and done. It is every day, every goal, every teaching strategy, every assessment is accessible and engaging to all students. Okay? So I'm going to show you a couple of tools that will help you to try to answer this. But I just want you to talk for a second. How many of your colleagues would maybe argue that they're already doing this? So just have a conversation about that real quick. Okay. So the reality is I bet you almost all of your teachers at some point provide students with a little bit of flexibility in how they learn or how they show what they know. That does not mean they're UDL practitioners, okay? So I'm going to give you an example of this. My husband and I are decent endurance athletes. You know, both of us could run a marathon. We run the Spartan Beast. We're in no way competitive, but like, you know, I got the lungs for it. I got the long haul. And so we ran the Spartan Beast in Killington, Vermont, you know, which is like a 15-mile race where you're literally carrying 80-pound sandbags and climbing trees and, you know, going through water and all of those things. And, you know, we completed the Spartan. And then my 4 kids, I'm a mom of 4. I have a 9-year-old, 2 8-year-olds, and a 4-year-old. And they wanted to do the little kid Spartan race. And it's like a half a mile, and it's super cute, and they like run through the mud, and they went through these cornfields, and they jump over hay. It's like very adorable. And when they finished, they said, "Mom, we're Spartans like you and Dad." And I was like, that's adorable. And that's what I feel like when people tell me they're already doing this. Where it's like, oh, that's really cute that you gave that up, right? But I'm not trying to, the reality is that's where you have to start. Okay, so I'm not trying to be like super fresh here, but all that is a start. And too many people think that that is also the finish. So like, yes, I do this. You know, when they're studying, they can choose to look over their notes or the textbook. And you're like, okay, that's a really good start. You know, because for some kids, the textbook becomes a little problematic. You know, then I would start asking questions, do you give them a copy of the notes? So they have choice about how they're taking the notes. There are slotted notes available. Can they have access to your slides? Can they study together? Do you have a study group, right? And then I start saying, like, that's the options I really want to see to prepare all students for a test. But where you're at is an awesome start, because that's a lot better than requiring everyone to just read the textbook to study, okay? So eventually, when we really like promote and embrace, when we see the beginnings of this, we help people to recognize the value in it. And so, you know, my kids, if like, you know, we make a big deal every time they run, doesn't it feel so good to hike? Like, oh my gosh, it's so great to feel in shape. Eventually, they're going to want to do this independently, and they're going to start pushing themselves more. Like, hey, I want to run a 5K. Hey, I want to try out for my middle school cross-country team, right? And so these beautiful little ladies here, they're a high school cross-country team, but like, they're not at the end of their game either. You know, you can always get faster, you can always have a better refueling strategy, you can always get better sneakers, and like too often in education, we don't recognize that the journey is never ending. Being a UDL practitioner is something that you do every day for your whole career. It's not something that you can say is done. And I think that that is the mindset that we have to change, is that mindset of teachers need to be expert learners. That like we have to be motivated and resourceful and goal-directed to try to make our practice better for all kids. And so this journey isn't always linear. You know, sometimes I'll even try things and they implode, they're terrible. You know, and I have to like back up and say, okay, I have to have different options moving forward. But what's really interesting is a lot of teachers get really scared that like, if I do this, I'm gonna literally eliminate myself. Like if kids become really great learners, where am I? But I would argue that a coach is far more important than the guy, to the guy who won the Boston Marathon than it is to my kids. Okay, the better you get, the more you need someone to push you and refine that. And so, you know, when you have teachers who are like, okay, seriously, I want your feedback. I want to get better. Like, I want to do this. That's a very different mindset than, I'm already doing this. I can't believe we're talking about this again. And that's when you say your data indicates that you might be emerging in these practices, but we haven't eliminated inequities for students. So let's talk about what you're doing really well, and let's talk about how you can provide more options and choices. Okay? And so the progression rubric is basically designed to show what does UDL look like at its emerging levels. Okay? And what you're going to see here is this is why so many people think they're doing it, and you have links to this in the presentation. But like at an emerging level, this just says emerging up here, right? I wouldn't even call this UDL. But when you're starting to explore UDL and you're starting to recognize that kids really should, you know, might benefit from doing things in a different way, you start off with, I will allow you to do something different. There's still a lot of power that I'm holding there, and it might be in like, it used to be everyone has to write a report about Spain, and it becomes choose a country that speaks Spanish, you know, or you know, whatever. And it's like, I'm doing UDL because I do that, and you're like, oh dear goodness. It might be in how students learn. So, you know, it used to be everyone read the same chapter. It becomes, you can either read a chapter, you can watch a video, or you can come over here with me in a small group and I'll explain it in like a mini lecture. It might be in the assessment, which is, okay, to show me that you understand the photosynthesis, you can either, you know, create a poster or write a paragraph, right? This is where you're probably seeing things now. Of like, there are some people who are willing to emerge into a UDL lesson, but kids are not learners because I am still puppeteering the whole thing. They are not co-designers because the choices are limited to my own identity and my own bias. So I will allow, like I can only give you an option to use a technology tool that I know how to use, okay? And that's problematic. So where we want to go to is ultimately we want to get to a place where teachers can say, okay, this is what you all need to know or be able to do. And I'm going to do a little mini lesson so we're all on the same page. I'm going to provide you with some instruction. And then you're going to have opportunities to self-differentiate your learning. We're going to do a lot of formative assessments to make sure you're making good choices and reflecting. You're going to do a lot of different self-differentiated assessments. But you guys, I really want you to think about, like, if there's a strategy or a technology or something that you know about that I don't know about, I need you to suggest it. So I remember like the first time I did this in my practice, it was like we were talking about themes, they got to choose their books, they could read the books in audio or an ebook on their phones, in hard copy, they were all like super into, I said the Lexile has to be 7th grade, if you have to listen to it, if you have to do a graphic novel, that's cool, but like I want rigor. And now you're going to express to me what you know about the theme of that book. And I said, you know, a couple of thoughts that I have is you could do a traditional piece, because I already have the exemplars and the graphic organizers and things like that. You can do this. And I still remember that one kid's like, you know, it'd be so cool if I could do it, like, imagine that the book was like a movie, and the book was not a movie, and I made like a soundtrack. Could I like pick the soundtrack, but then write about every song how it's representative of a theme? And I'm like, sweetie, that seems like a lot more work because I really only need one theme, and if you put 5 songs, that's 5 themes. He said, but can I do it? I'm like, oh my gosh, of course you can do it. Could I make a CD? Could you like play the CD? And I'm like, the kid went so above and beyond. And it was like, that was when we burned CDs. He burned me a CD. He designed the soundtrack from the book. He was like so excited to play the song, right? That would never have happened because I would have never thought of it. And it's like the fact that the kid could say, can I do this, and knew it was safe, was really important to me. I had another kid come in once, and he just didn't have the resources at home. I asked him to do a response, and he came in and he was so embarrassed. And he's like, Novak. I'm like, what? He's like, we didn't have paper. And I was like, that's okay, buddy, do you need to like borrow paper? And he's like, I did the homework on like a napkin, but I don't know if you'll take it. I'm like, of course I'll take it. I'm like, oh my gosh, what a problem solver. That's so awesome. Like, this is so cool. He's like, I tried to highlight it, ripped it a little bit. I'm like, heck yeah, you did. Like, who cares? Those napkins suck. This was awesome, right? But like, do they feel safe enough to be a part of the design of their own education? And that is the question that we really have to ask. And then ultimately, we want kids to be expert learners, and an expert learner feels empowered to express what they know, to have their voice heard, to ask the teacher for feedback, to ask their peers for help. So that kiddo who was all jacked up about the casseroles, okay, I want him to have an opportunity to give feedback on his learning. You know, to say, like, okay guys, let's check in, like, how are we doing in here? Like, how am I having your needs met as a teacher? I would love to give a feedback survey. Tell me, like, what is one thing that I'm doing that works for you? Tell me one thing that I could be doing better. Like, how often do we create those conversations? Because we are so buried in planning, as if we're the only one who's planning. Okay, but you can plan with parents, you can plan with colleagues, you can plan with kids. And a lot of people are like, but I teach pre-K. Yeah. Kids have amazing ideas when they're 3 and 4. Amazing. Okay? You have to honor their experience and their identity enough to allow them to be a part of it. And that's what UDL is really about. And so what does this look like? Is there's a couple of different tools that you have access to that will help you to see what UDL is about. You know, because when people are saying, I'm already doing UDL, you can show them one of these tools and say, you might be actually implementing this at like a beginning level, and we're so lucky to have you at the beginning of that journey, because there's some people who haven't even started yet. So that's awesome. I would love for you to share what you're doing, but I care too much about your performance to let you think that you're done. Because you can always do more. And ultimately, what does that look like? Here's a really quick example. This is an example because I taught secondary English, and you can just imagine how this would look at different levels. A traditional prompt is going to be, in even really high quality curriculum programs, they have kids reading excerpts of high quality text, okay? So this was a prompt that was in a program, and it was just basically they were given a source. It was from Lord of the Flies, and then they had to say whether they felt that evil was nature or nurture, right? And I look at that and I say, well, that assumes everyone can decode. That assumes people care about a bunch of boys stranded on an island like 50 years ago. Okay, it assumes a lot. I can tell you what's wrong with that without even knowing what kid I'm going to get. And then I give it a UDL makeover, which was, in source number 2, Golding, he's asking if violent behavior is nature or nurture. But then I say, after reading or listening to the excerpt, okay, so I'll provide to them in text in hard copy. If they need to translate it, they can do that on their device. Otherwise, people say, how do you get the audio? I record my voice on the phone. It's a short excerpt. It'll take you literally a minute and a half. You could also get kids to do it. So in 7th grade, if I wanted an audiobook, I would just literally bribe them and be like, all right, everybody, I was telling the back table, I will buy pizza tomorrow for 12 people who will come read me 1 chapter each to make an audiobook. And I'd have like 70 people sign up and have to do a lottery. I'd be like, I'll get you next time, I'll get you on the next poem. And then you can upload it to Google Classroom, like chapter 1 read by Katie, chapter 2 read by Jose, in chapter 3, that's how you get an audiobook for 0. And so then I would say, okay, now, kids shouldn't be reading a single source anyway. It's like not college and career ready. There's no test they'll ever take where they get 1 text. So just think about that. How often are kids being asked to respond to 1 text? It is completely irrelevant. Okay, every MCAS, every PARC, every SAT, every AP is looking at multiple texts. So those multiple texts, in the PARC, it could be a video, it could be that, right? So I say find another text about violence. And I'd be like, guys, don't get me fired, right? Like that's the low bar. Look at anything that won't get Katie fired, right? And so, I could say, like, here's a couple things on Newsella, because Newsella takes your Washington Post articles and your Newsweek articles, and it puts them at different levels. Go into videos, talk about, like, music videos, whatever. Take 20 minutes and, like, think about, like, what are your true opinions on violence? And now, after reviewing those resources, you're going to explain your views on violent behavior, and you're going to do that in a podcast or a blog or other product. Now, why do I do that? Why don't I require writing? Because citing evidence is not a writing standard, it's a reading standard. It's not a writing standard, okay? And so I don't require the writing, but I want to support the writing. So then I say, as you're working, here's a graphic organizer. You can use any tool on your device. I don't care if you use Google Read and Write, I don't care if you use Dragon Naturally Speaking, I am here, and then as kids are working, I'm just walking around, I'm checking in, I'm micro-teaching, I'm differentiating instruction if I have to. All right, sweetie, you seem really confused, what can I do for you? But like, you take this on the left, and you can see, that's very restrictive. I am not lowering the rigor, I'm actually, I think, increasing the rigor, but I'm also increasing the ability for them to learn and make it meaningful. And, if they're spelling things wrong, well, they can't type, then they use spell check. Okay, that's fine. And then say, but on this test, they have to use spell check. I'm like, again, I refuse to create an education for 180 days to prepare kids for a 6-hour test. I refuse to do it, right? And so it's all about this concept of like, the kid needs tiered intervention in phonics if they're not spelling by the time they get to me in 10th grade. And they should get that in addition to my class. But I will not penalize their work and make them feel like they have nothing to say by circling every word they spelled wrong. Right? Let them use spell check. And so again, UDL is a choice to include opposed to a choice to exclude. In math, this can look very similar. Again, we hand out problems all the time. I will tell you, vulnerable on my life, I could not solve that problem right now. I just don't know what it's asking me to do. But we give problems to kids all the time. That, like, I would look at that and be like, what am I looking at here? So what are you going to put on the buffet? I'm not saying don't give them this problem. You don't need an easier problem. You need more scaffolding. So like, why can't they use a Desmos or a calculator? Or, just give them, like, when would I see this? You could say, well, if X is like the money you put into your bank account and take out, whatever, let's say you're saving for a Red Sox ticket, give them the formulas. For me, if I just had one exemplar of a done problem, I could replicate this problem. Okay? And then we talk about math talk, but like vocab, like I'm assuming you want me to use words like that, but I wouldn't use them. I'd be like, the difference between -3 and -7 is 4, and like, but you don't want me to say that. You want me to, talk about like the dividend, and again, I was not a math teacher, but again, we say it's cheating. I'm not going to give the calculator. It's cheating. Okay? If you do not have your math facts, I agree you need intervention to get your math facts. But if the lack of math facts prevents you from being able to be in a class with your peers in 10th grade, just get a calculator. Okay, that's like, allow it on the buffet. So again, just as we think about UDL and the importance of designing, just keep in mind like that big part of firm goals, flexible means, but also keep in mind that this is a journey, that it's okay that your teachers haven't started yet. The goal is emerging. Once they're emerging, the goal is proficient. Once they're proficient, so it's like giving them those tools to help them to see, some of you are doing some of this already, but it doesn't mean you're done. And some of you aren't doing it yet, and it doesn't mean you're not capable of doing it, it's just providing a concrete next step. Okay, because again, we have to make change, but we have to take people along with us. So thank you so much. You and I can go home out into the world, and I will see you all tomorrow.